Hey everybody, and welcome to Dungeons and Drams. One of the most requested things from you all is how do I generate the artwork that I've been using in some of these videos? And so I wanted to go through this today. This is going to be a little bit harder to do, and there's going to be a lot more cuts in this one because frankly, it doesn't always do a good job, but we're going to refine the prompts and we're going to do our best, and I'll show you some of the tricks that I use. But just know that anything that I'm showing you guys is probably like the 5th or 6th iteration that I'm doing on that monster. So let's jump right into the prompt. This is the prompt that I use to create homebrew monsters, and I've gone over this in a previous video, but I will also put this prompt down in the description below if you'd like to see it. But basically, this is everything that I think makes a good homebrew monster. So after I asked it if it understood this, it came up with a monster called the Crystaline Harbinger. And after, reading through this and whatever, I think this is basically a giant crystal golem is the idea. So the concept and theme and the physical description are going to be the important ones here. So I will read those. A massive elemental creature made of brilliant sparkling crystals whose radiance hides a deadly secret. Okay, I don't know what that is. The Crystaline Harbinger stands tall, its body reaching up to 20 feet in height. Its form is made entirely of an array of crystals, each glittering with different hues under the light. As it moves, a symphony of soft chimes echoes in the air. All right, so we're going to go over to Midjourney and try to do something with this prompt. If you're unfamiliar with Midjourney at all, then this is going to be a bit of a crash course, but I'll do my best to kind of keep it succinct for those that are familiar and enough information for those that aren't. But it's worth going and checking out some tutorials on how to use this tool. It's actually very cool. So the first thing that you want to type is /imagine. Now this is going to give you a prompt, and this is where you type in what you want. Now, a few things that are important just right off the bat. If you have an image that you want to base this creature off of, and I am not condoning using anybody else's artwork or anything like that. Maybe you have your own artwork that you have saved off to a drive. Maybe you even drew something out and then you uploaded it to like Imager or something like that. You can use that URL. Now, here's the important thing. That URL should be the first thing in your prompt. If you look at Midjourney's documentation, they suggest that you use links first, but there are some creative uses around that. But either way, if you have an image, put that first. I do not have an image for this thing. So the first thing I want to tell it is what style do I want this to be in? And in this case, I've found a lot of luck with either, if I'm designing NPCs, I will say fantasy character portrait or I won't say NPC. I'll say fantasy character portrait or fantasy character full body, things like that. Leaving the word fantasy out of it does help too, depending on what you're going for. If you say fantasy and then you say elf, it's going to know what you want. If you say fantasy and you say, I don't know, something inappropriate, it's going to go a different way with this. So in this case, I want to go with fantasy monster concept. And then I'm going to go Dungeons and Dragons style. So both of those are kind of what I use a lot. So fantasy monster concept, cool. It knows it's going to make a fantasy monster. Dungeons and Dragons style, it knows what artwork from Dungeons and Dragons typically looks like. And I'm sorry for the prompt being kind of small here. I'll put something up on the screen so you can read it better. So after this, I'm actually going to take something straight from the concept and theme, and I'm going to put this right into the prompt. A massive elemental creature made of brilliant sparkling crystals. Now, I don't have to put the part in there about whose radiance hides a deadly secret. I could, but that doesn't give Midjourney any real information. The next piece, I'm going to go to the physical description. I'm going to say the Crystaline Harbinger stands tall. So I'm going to interpret that as just 20 feet tall, because it did say that. Its form is made entirely of an array of crystals, each glittering with different hues under the light. I'm just going to take that whole sentence. I think that's a good sentence. All right, we'll put that in. I separate all of the descriptors with commas. I've found a lot of help with that. As it moves, a symphony of soft chimes echoes in the air. That's not going to be helpful at all. Maybe it is. I could put that in and I could see what that did, but I don't think that's going to help. So there's a couple things I want to do to this prompt before I actually enter it. And these are called, I actually don't know what they're called. I would refer to them as content prompts. So let's go back over our prompt here. Fantasy monster concept, Dungeons and Dragons style, a massive elemental creature made of brilliant sparkling crystals. So this is how I would reword that. A massive, parentheses, content, space, elemental creature, and then I close parentheses, made of, again, parentheses, content, brilliant sparkling crystals, close parentheses. It does get a little tedious, but it's only because I'm reading it out loud. 20 feet tall, its form is made entirely of an array of crystals. I could do another content one there, but I'm not going to. Each glittering with different hues under the light. Actually, I'm going to leave this the way it is right now. There's one more thing that I would typically do. So let's say I need to make this into a character token. Doing the normal aspect ratio is going to be perfect for that. It's going to do kind of a 1:1 ratio. But if I wanted something like a thumbnail, or if I wanted something for like a YouTube short or something like that, you can do --AR, and then you give it the aspect ratio like 2:3 or 16:9, something like that. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it normal, and we're going to see what this comes up with. It does take a little while to generate these things, and I actually have the paid version, which is something that thankfully my patrons have been able to help me to afford. So if you're enjoying these videos, of course, I would love it if you'd come join the Patreon and just throw a couple bucks. These videos are not cheap to make because of all of the AI, but if you're enjoying them, either way, you're at this point in the channel's life, the subscribe and the like are good enough. So by all means, I hope that you come back and continue to watch, but if you can afford it, it would actually help me out a lot. So, well, this generated some pretty cool stuff. So if I click on this, you'll see them quite a bit bigger, and it gives you 4 different options. Each one is kind of different, right? But the first 2 are more monstrous, and the second 2 are more like a towering golem. I don't like the third one because it puts a person in the perspective, and we said this thing was 20 feet tall. And in this, assuming this person's about 6 feet tall, this thing looks more like 50 feet. So I don't love that one. The fourth one is pretty cool. I kind of want it to look a little bit less humanoid personally, which makes me think I kind of like the first one. Now, of course, I could regenerate these entirely, and I will, because let's say, it put these things out in what looks like a moonscape. The stars are behind it. There's really no terrain here. I don't want that. I want a different background to this, but I love the first one. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the first guy, and I'm going to click on V1, which means basically make a variant of this. So it has your same prompt here. Now, this is something I should have thought to put in the beginning, but, filming a tutorial video, you don't always remember everything. So the last thing that I always put is what I want the background to look like. So where would we see this guy? We would see him inside of like a crystal cavern or something like that. So I'd say background of a crystal, let's say a massive crystal cavern. I like that. So let's go ahead and submit. It's going to start regenerating this with my new prompt, and you can't do a ton with the variety, so it's best to get the prompt right from the first part or just redo the prompt altogether. But the variety has been getting a little bit smarter. I would guess by like the next version, it will be perfect. But in this case, actually, it looks a little bit like it's going to do a good job, but we'll see what it comes up with. All right, so as you can see, it did regenerate this. It knows that I liked the way that this guy looked, but it didn't put it in a massive crystal cavern. So I'm going to try the prompt completely again. So I copied the prompt from the first one, so it has no real clue what else I was looking at already. It doesn't know that I want it based off the first one. So it is going to generate 4 new monsters for us, and we might not get what we want. This is why I was saying you usually have to iterate over these quite a bit. But in this case, I did add the background of a massive crystal cavern. So let's see what it comes up with. This did much better. I would say the scale is still potentially a little off, but I actually really like this second one here. I think it is just humanoid enough, but huge, but also made of crystal. So why would it have a face? You know what I mean? In this case, I'm going to grab the second one, and it does appear to be inside of a cavern. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to grab the second one, and I'm going to hit U2, which means upscale 2. Now, this is going to upscale the second image. It's like a quadrant, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, not really like a quadrant, but you know what I mean. So once I grab this image, this is something cool, especially if you use a VTT. So I'm going to save that off locally. And then I'm going to use a tool called Token Stamp 2. This is from rolladvantage.com/token stamp. And if I take this image and drop it in here, I can then go make a VTT token out of this guy. So I could either zoom in really close on his face, which that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, or I can keep it kind of at a smaller thing. And now this is a token I can just kind of drop right into my game. If I don't want, I usually use this border for something I think is going to be an enemy. But if I want this to be something that isn't necessarily going to be a fight, although he certainly looks like he would be, I would maybe use this border and then throw a similar color that makes sense. Something like that maybe looks pretty good, or maybe I do go with like a silverish. Either way, you could fiddle with that. And now you can download this and put it right into your game. So that's what I will do. Actually, if I want to, if I have homebrewed a character, I will often use AI to generate images of it. And I think that it just comes out looking really cool. So I use this tool constantly. Highly recommend. But let's go ahead and create something different. Apparently I'm in a little sadistic mood because I have, can you generate a horrifying creature that lives in the darkness and is meant to terrify my players? So this is going to generate a creature for me, and it's going to do the same thing as that last golem and come up with all of this stuff. It's going to be called the Umbra Wraith. It's a formless phantom composed of pure shadow feeding off of fear and darkness. And we'll let this spit itself out, and then I'll go over to Midjourney. So we're going to make the Umbra Wraith, which is a terrifying formless phantom composed of pure shadow feeding off of fear and darkness. It's a formless pitch black entity that seems to absorb all light around it. It can shape itself into vaguely humanoid forms or spread out to an area to cover an area in a blanket of darkness. So all of this is actually a fairly complicated physical description. So I'm not sure how Midjourney is going to do with this, but I think we could probably make it work if we prompt it properly. So what I've decided to prompt this with is fantasy monster concept, Dungeons and Dragons style, horror, terrifying. I thought that those were important because I wanted to get the concept right. A pitch black formless phantom composed of pure shadow that absorbs light around it. Tendrils emanate out of it that are vaguely humanoid and envelop the area. The background is the inside of a haunted looking abandoned house. So this time I remembered to put the background on there. I'm going to guess that I'm going to need to prompt this one more than once. I think it's probably not going to quite get what I have in my head. So I have in my head something almost like a Dementor, but darker. And what I really wanted to get were those tendrils kind of looking like little people almost. It says that it can vaguely look humanoid, but I wanted to make it a little bit different, where these little tendrils will have like a humanoid look to them. So what it's coming up with, it looks like it's going to be kind of like a shadow person, which is okay, but I want it to look more monstrous. So I think that we'll probably end up adjusting this prompt, but let's see what it comes up with. I think this actually did a better job than I was expecting. It really nailed the tendrils, but they don't look humanoid. But I actually think I like this more because if you think about the description, even though I want the tendrils to kind of look humanoid, I do think that's going to be a little hard. We'll try, but I think that's going to be a little tough. This looks like the description I put in there though. So I kind of like this first one, and I kind of like the second one. The second one looks a little bit more classic. The fourth one, it's definitely monstrous, but I don't think that's really what I was going for. I'm looking for something that if you walk around the corner and you just see, like, look at this number one. If you walked into an abandoned house and you saw something that looked like that, that is terrifying. Let's see if we can make those tendrils look a little bit more like little creatures kind of creeping out of the floor. So I changed this up to use some of those content prompts. So I said fantasy monster concept, Dungeons and Dragons style, same thing. Horror, terrifying. And then I did content, a pitch black formless phantom composed of pure shadow that absorbs light around it. So now you've got your thing. Content, vaguely humanoid tendrils emanate out of the floor around it. And then I have the background is the inside of a haunted looking abandoned house. So let's see what this does. So I don't think that what it came up with here is better than what it had before. I think actually adding those content prompts gave it a little bit less context for it to imagine itself within an abandoned house. Because if you look here, the only one of them actually even looks like it might be the basement of a house. And it didn't nail those tendrils. So in this case, the content actually, I found it to be more useful for things like if you want to say an NPC is holding a sword. I would say, fantasy NPC concept, a dwarven female with a beard, something like that. And then I'll say content, holding a warhammer in her hands, or sorry, I'd say like holding a content warhammer with silver filigree or something. You describe the warhammer and then you close off that parenthesis. So let's go on to something that's like a little less creepy. So let's try something like, let's go with an NPC actually. We can make monsters all the time and they can look kind of but they're just monsters. So let's make something that actually looks like an elven woman. Let's go with that. So I utilized ChatGPT and the NPC prompt that I've come up with in the past, which I'll put down in the description below. But I used that and I prompted it with some features of an elven woman. And I said that I wanted it to focus on her dress being, I wanted her to be beautiful and like whatever else. I just said like concentrate on the dress because I wanted to have some detail here. So this is what it came up with and then what I interpreted it as. So fantasy character concept, full body elven woman. Now the full body is important because it's going to create the full body. Sometimes you could write portrait and it will just kind of do like this bit, but full body will show everything. So full body, elven woman, tall, slender, athletic figure, soft alabaster skin, flowing silver hair. These are all things that ChatGPT gave me. It gave like a whole big description of her for you to actually read as the DM, but this is me condensing it down. So tall, slender, athletic figure, soft alabaster skin, flowing silver hair, forest green eyes, wearing and I did a content prompt, content tiara made of silver, masterfully crafted, to show you that I don't have to give it all the detail. I just wanted to be wearing a tiara. And another content prompt, content long flowing green dress, the color of fresh spring leaves, soft shimmering fabric, delicate embroidery of various herbs and flowers, neckline and sleeves adorned with delicate lace made from spider silk. Now, all of that detail was what ChatGPT kind of gave me. It described this dress and I condensed it down to that. But this NPC was generated as an herbalist and a healer, so now her dress has some factors that go into that. And a content belt made of braided vines. That'll be interesting because, again, I didn't give it a whole lot of prompting. Background of an elven settlement in the woods, because you got to remember your background. Okay, this is actually bringing up a really interesting point that I want to put out here, but we'll go over this real quick. So if you look at these 4, it gives you some pretty different art styles. This first one's a little bit cartoonish. Maybe it would be like what you'd see on a mobile game. The second one, actually, I think it looks a little bit like an olden style. I could see that as like somebody's actual artwork. The third one, I don't really know what to make of that. But then the fourth one actually looks pretty realistic. Almost like if you were really good at Photoshop, you could make that look like it was a real person. This brings in the modifiers that you could put at the end of this for hyper realistic and ultra high res and cinematic. So we're going to do a few of these. So I'm going to use this exact same prompt, and I'm going to show you what it looks like if I add some of these qualifiers to the end. I added 3 things to the end of this prompt, and they're going to change it pretty dramatically, I think. So the first one is hyper realistic. So I believe all of them are going to look much more closely to that 4th option. Then I did cinematic. Now, cinematic tends to be really good for things like, it would have been better for the monsters, but I wanted to throw that on here anyway. And then volumetric lighting. That's another thing I tend to mix with the cinematic. The idea is if you have fog, it's going to consider the fog along with the lighting. Now, since we have this character in the woods in like an elven city, I think it's reasonable to think that there might be some fog around, or maybe the light would kind of dance through the leaves. So if I consider the lighting, that is something to consider with the volumetric lighting. So in this case, 3 out of the 4 of them look considerably more realistic. In fact, that first one, I swear that could be like somebody's cosplay that they just over photoshopped, right? The third one and the fourth one, a little bit less realistic, but you could see, especially in the fourth one here, the lighting is going on with the background. Same thing with the second one here. They really kind of made this fog in the background. That's because of volumetric lighting that I put. These little sparkles around, that's just, something that it did. Now, there's a million other little things that you can change about Midjourney, and it's not the right video to go into all of those. Frankly, I know a lot of them, but not all of them anyway, and not well enough to describe. But if this is something that you want to get into, I highly, highly recommend the $10 a month charge, because you're going to be able to generate some with the free trial, but you're going to get hooked on this if you're anything like me. Especially if you're watching this video, then you're probably a bit like me. I want to generate one more thing here. And this is going to be a fantasy landscape, because something that I have used to help inspire me is I'll have an idea for a location, but I don't really know how to describe it well. But if I'm looking at a picture of it, I can describe it way better. So let's come up with, I have a location in my world. It's called the Disintegrated Peaks. The idea is an ancient red dragon exploded a volcano and it totally destroyed this whole area around the volcano. I want to try to make that area in Midjourney so that if I had to describe it, I could look at that picture and be like, this is what it looks like. So let's try. Okay, we're going to start off with just what I've written, and then I'll probably iterate on it. So we're going to start off with fantasy landscape concept art. How's that for a mouthful? So then you have large craggy mountain, active volcano, hellscape, lava, gray sky, large red dragon flying in the distance circling the volcano. And I could make that a content prompt, but I'm not going to try that yet. I'm going to try that maybe next if it doesn't work. Then I said epic, dramatic, and intimidating. I always find that adding things like emotion to this gives it a better idea of what you're going for. If I would have written all of that and then I would have said cartoony, happy, and fun, I'm curious what it would come up with, but I bet it wouldn't be what I have in my mind. So let's see what this comes up with. Oh, I also changed the aspect ratio to be 16:9, because if this worked out well, I would potentially want to have this maybe even on my VTT so I could show it. And my VTT ends up being 16:9. So let's see what this comes up with. And I can actually already kind of tell that it's focusing too much on the dragon. And I can show you how to deal with that. It's actually kind of cool. So yeah, if you look here, this is not quite what I want. It does actually have the mountains going on right, but the dragon is supposed to be a minor part of this. So what you can do two things. Number one is I did end up making the large red dragon flying in the distance, circling the volcano into a content prompt. But what you can do is these double colons, right? These are called multi-part prompts or multi-prompts. And if you do this, it will separate that into knowing it's a different entity. But more so, you can add a number 1 through 3 to tell it how much to focus on that thing. So I'm going to do the content piece with : 3 to tell it to really don't focus on the dragon so much. I want it to be in the background. We'll see what this does with it. I might just have to leave it out, or maybe generate that image separately and then Photoshop the two of them together to actually really get what I want. Don't be beyond taking these things into Photoshop and doing something with them too. In fact, it could be a good way for you to learn Photoshop. Okay, so it's still not really getting it, but I will say I think it's just luck that this third one came out without a dragon really in it, and I think maybe one of these dots back here is supposed to be the dragon. Either that or it just got confused. These little arcs, they could be the wings of a dragon that it interpreted as being mountain peaks. So I'm going to leave the dragon off of this one, and I'm going to see if I could just generate the disintegrating peaks as I kind of picture them. So this is getting closer. I now have what is essentially just an exploded fiery doom, but there's even some little birds and something flying back here, which is kind of cool. This is still not quite what I'm looking for, although the fourth one here is getting closer, and this little piece right here could be interpreted as a dragon, but I wouldn't want to. This one's getting pretty close too, but I did adjust the prompt. And something to note too is that with Midjourney, you can use 3 prompts at a time, so you don't have to just wait for these to be done. You can kind of see what's generating and then start iterating on it while it's generating. But in this case, I like some of these, but I don't think it's quite there. So I changed the prompt a little bit to say large, dark, craggy mountain range instead of just mountain. And then I left most of the rest of it, actually I think all of the rest of it, the same. Okay, I think that this is actually a really good representation of what I'm thinking. So this first one here, this looks like the hellscape that I'm picturing. And if you look at this, actually, you know what, I'll show you. So this is the disintegrated peaks. So this is really all that I have to go on as far as what I have in my head. So when I take that and now I go over to this first image here, I think that is a pretty cool representation of what that looks like. And I've got to say that I'm not heartbroken over that. If I were to show my players, I think that they would get what I'm going for. All right, so I've got one more thing I want to show you guys, and I'll kind of make this a little bit quicker because I've already generated these. But I want to show you how you can take a monster concept and then change it so that you have several different types of monsters, all that look very similar, and then you can use that. So let me show you. So at this point, if you're one of my players, tune away from this because this might be a bit of a spoiler for the campaign that we're in. So I have these kobolds, and these kobolds are being corrupted by an underdark mushroom plant monster thing. And so I wanted to have some corrupted kobolds. So I utilized ChatGPT to help me to figure out some stat blocks for them, which I've talked about in a previous video, but I also needed to have some artwork for these. Otherwise they'd be not as cool, especially in a VTT, you have to have artwork. So I went to D&D Beyond and I grabbed an image of a kobold and I used that as part of the prompt. But you'll see in a second that it really obliterated it. It just kind of gave it a form to work with. So for example, I have this corrupted kobold that is, I gave it all kinds of prompts. I was like, I want mushrooms growing from it and everything. This guy's called the Mush Hammer Kobold. So I said that I wanted him to have some hammers that are made out of mushrooms that he's just swinging around. And I gave it all kinds of stuff. I said it should be scary. It should be like terrifying. It should be creepy, but he should be made of mushrooms and whatever. So you can see he doesn't look anything like a kobold at this point, but the kobold prompt gave it a concept of size as well as somewhere to start from. The next guy was a psionic kobold. So he's kind of like a mage, but more so he's using psychic abilities. I said that I wanted him to have a mushroom in his hand that he's using kind of like as a arcane focus or something like that. So they put one in his hand and he's got, actually, I just noticed he's got a little mushroom growing out of his head. which is kind of cool. So then there's the Razor Claw Kobold. This guy, I specifically said that I wanted him to have sharp claws. He's going to be kind of a melee guy. He's going to be getting in there. He's got a multi-attack where he's like, you know. So after that, I have the Spore Infused Kobold. So this guy pretty much goes up to people, his head explodes, and then they find themselves poisoned. And then there's the Tentacle Armed Kobold. Now this guy, I wanted to have a hammer mushroom in one hand, but I wanted one of his hands to be so corrupted it had turned into like a tentacle thing, and you can kind of use it as a whip. So that was what you can do with these Midjourney things. If you utilize some of the prompts that I've given you in the past as to how to make stat blocks, you can now take that along with the description into Midjourney with what I showed you in this video, and you can come up with that. I will tell you, those actually did not take very long to create. It was just utilizing some of the tips and tricks that I've given you guys here to make them. You will have to spend time with this. Do not do this the minute before your session starts, but know that you can come up with stuff consistently that actually looks really cool. All right, thank you guys. Thank you for the suggestion of this video. It was fun to film, and even though we failed a few times, but that comes with the territory. So thank you guys all for joining me here. Give me your suggestions in the comments below of what you'd like to see me record and go over here. I have all kinds of ideas. I've got at least another 10 of them. I keep making notes all day long. So let me know what you want to see, and I'll get to them very shortly. Cheers.